December 29th, 1876, 3:47 in the morning. The wind doesn't sound like wind anymore. It sounds like 1,000 freight trains tearing across the Dakota prairie, ripping the earth apart, searching for anything warm, anything living, anything foolish enough to believe it can survive. James Thornfield is 17 years old. He sits across from his grandfather in a hole carved 8 feet into a hillside, watching the old man's hands shake as they wrap around a tin cup of coffee. Outside, the thermometer reads 41 degrees below zero. Inside this dugout, this earth-walled shelter that everyone said would fail, that everyone said would collapse or flood or freeze, the temperature holds steady at 58 degrees. Lars Thornfield is 71. His hands look like dried wood knuckles, swollen fingers bent from 7 decades of hard labor. But those hands built 3 hillside houses in Sweden before he came to America. Those hands know things that younger, stronger hands have forgotten. The old man speaks in that thick Swedish accent that turns every statement into something that feels both like a question and a command. Your great-grandfather Nils, he built into hills in Dalarna. 1803, worst winter Sweden ever saw. Minus 45 Celsius. Everyone in timber houses, they froze. But Nils, he slept warm. You know why Jim has heard this story 100 times? Maybe more. But tonight, with the wind screaming like the world is ending, with the entire dugout shuddering under the assault, with dust sifting down from between the sod bricks in the ceiling, the story means something different. Tonight, it's not history, it's survival. The earth remembers warmth, Jim says. Lars nods satisfied. Jordan mins. The earth remembers. Men forget. They come to new land they want to build. Like everyone else, show they belong, show they're modern, show they're American. But Earth never forgets. The cast iron stove in the corner barely smokes. 6 pounds of wood today, maybe 7. 3 miles north, Magnus Thorson is burning 40 pounds, and still his family huddles in coats, watching frost climb the interior walls of his $400 timber house. 2 miles east, Thomas Barrett's stone house, built by a master mason, sits at 30 degrees inside while his children sleep fully dressed, their breath visible in the candlelight. Jim stands, checks the chimney draft. Perfect. The clay-lined tunnel, angling 30 degrees through the hillside, draws smoke exactly as his father calculated it would. He checks the floor runs, his hand along the packed earth. Dry. The 1-inch slope per 6 feet is imperceptible to walk on, but sufficient to drain any moisture toward the entrance. He looks up at the 6 lodgepole pine timbers supporting 3 tons of sod and snow above their heads. All holding, all strong. But 8 weeks ago, nobody believed any of this would work. 8 weeks ago, Jim Thornfield stood in a different room watching his mother die. October 18th, 1876. Cholera took Helen Thornfield in 3 days. 3 days of fever of her body, rejecting everything, of watching her fade from the strong Swedish woman who could work alongside any man to something skeletal, something already halfway gone. Jim held her hand. It felt like paper, thin and dry and ready to crumble. Lars stood at the foot of the bed, 71 years old, and crying without sound, tears running down his weathered face into his gray beard. At the doorway, Uncle Jacob and Aunt Vivian waited with the practiced patience of people who have already moved past grief into calculation. Your father, Helen whispered, her voice barely audible. Samuel, he died building someone else's dream. Don't do that. I won't, Ma. The land, quarter section by the river. It's in your name, not Jacob's. Don't let him take it. Lars spoke in Swedish, telling her to save her strength. She ignored him, focused entirely on Jim, with eyes that had already started to look past this world into the next. In the shed, behind the millstone, your father's tools and a metal box. It's for you. Only you, Ma. Rest. Promise me, promise you'll fight for what's yours. Your father couldn't. You must. Jim's throat closed up. He managed to force out the words, I promise. She looked at Lars, then switched to Swedish. The old man answered also in Swedish, his voice breaking. Jim didn't need to understand the language to know what they were saying. Take care of him, teach him, don't let him make the same mistakes. Helen Thornfield died at 11:34 that night. Jacob and Vivian didn't wait for morning. That same night, Jim could hear them through the thin walls of the farmhouse, talking in voices they thought were quiet enough. The land is prime, south-facing slope, river access. worth twice what the deed says. The boy won't last one winter alone. Then we make him an offer. Generous enough to seem kind, low enough to profit. What about the old man Lars? He's 71. How much longer can he have Jim lay in his narrow bed in the room he'd slept in his entire life, listening to his uncle and aunt plan his future like he was livestock to be sold, and felt something harden in his chest. Something that felt like his father's stubbornness, his mother's determination, his grandfather's ancient Swedish refusal to bend. The next morning he went to the shed. The millstone sat exactly where it had always sat, massive and unused since his father's death. Jim moved it with a lever and a fulcrum, the way his father had taught him, the way men had moved heavy things for thousands of years before machines. Behind it, set into the dirt floor, was a metal box. The lock was rusted, but it gave way to his prying. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, he found $340 in bills. More money than he'd ever seen in one place. More money than most families saw in 2 years. Beneath the money, a land deed, quarter section 14, township 97, North Range 55, said, filed in the name of James Samuel Thornfield, legal, binding, his, and beneath that his father's notebook, leather-bound, water-stained, filled with Samuel Thornfield's careful handwriting and detailed sketches. Jim had never known his father kept a notebook, had never known his father was anything more than a logger, a man who cut trees and hauled timber and died when a widowmaker branch fell wrong during a spring storm. But these pages told a different story. His father had been a thinker, page after page of sketches, different roof angles with calculations of snow load distribution, notes about thermal mass. Earth at 6 feet stays constant, 50 to 55 degrees year-round. Diagrams of ventilation systems. Air must move, but slow controlled. Cost comparisons. Timber house $400 to $500. Sod house $150 to $200. Dugout $50 to $100. One page dated April 1875, 2 months before his father's death. Watched old Norwegian settler Olaf Sanderson digging into hillside for root cellar. Asked him why into hill instead of separate structure. He said earth is furnace in winter, icebox in summer. Why fight at revelation? Not just for vegetables, for people. Talked with Father Lars, he confirmed. Swedish farmers did this for centuries. Why did we forget American pride, stupidity? If I die, someone needs to remember this. Jim, if you're reading, remember this. Jim's hands shook as he held the notebook. His father had known, had been planning this, had understood that American ways were killing people, that the tall, proud houses everyone built to show prosperity were death traps in Dakota winters. Lars appeared in the doorway of the shed like a ghost. He moved quietly for a 71-year-old man. He was smarter than Jacob ever gave him credit for, the old man said. Why didn't he build one he was going to? This spring. But the accident. They stood in silence, 2 men in a shed, one old and one young, both holding pieces of a dead man's wisdom. Then I'll build it, Jim said. For him. Lars shook his head, slow and firm. No. You'll build it for you. He's dead. Honor him by surviving, not by dying trying to make him proud. That's harsh. Truth is harsh, Lars said. Dead men don't need houses, living men do. 2 days later, Uncle Jacob came with papers. He sat at the kitchen table trying to look concerned, trying to look like family instead of what he was. A man who saw opportunity in his nephew's grief. Jim, we need to talk about your future. What about it? You're 17? Orphaned. You can't work a claim alone. Can't prove up in 5 years. Hell, you can't survive one winter. Vivian stood behind him, her face arranged in an expression of sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. We're family, she said. We want to help. Jacob slid the papers across the table. I'll buy the claim. Fair price. $300. You and Lars can live with us, work the combined land. In a few years, when you're older, we'll see about getting you your own place. Jim looked at his grandfather. Lars's face was stone, but his eyes said your choice. The claim's not for sale. Jacob's smile faded like snow in sunlight. Jim, be reasonable. I said no. You think you can work 160 acres alone? A boy, I'm not alone. I have grandfather. Jacob actually laughed, cruel and short. Lars is 71. He can barely walk some days. What help is he? Lars spoke from his chair by the window, his Swedish accent thick, but his words perfectly clear. More help than a thief disguised as family. Jacob stood fast enough that his chair scraped loud against the floor. Watch your mouth, old man. Or what Lars stood too slower but steady. You'll throw us out, try. This house was my son's, the land is my grandson's. You have no claim here. The law says, the law says Jim owns the land, Lars interrupted. You want it, you buy it legal. He said no. Now leave. They stared at each other across the kitchen, two men from different generations, different countries, different ideas about what family meant. Jacob turned to Jim, ignoring Lars entirely. Winter's coming, you'll freeze or starve. When you're ready to sell, price will be 200. Every week you wait, it drops 50. He left. Vivian followed her sympathy, replaced by open contempt. When the door closed, Jim exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He'll come back, he said. Of course, Lars replied. Greedy men always come back. But now you know what you're fighting. Jim pulled out his father's notebook that night, spread it open on the kitchen table under lamplight, and studied every page like it was scripture. Because in a way it was. His father's last words. His father's final gift. Instructions for survival, written by a man who knew he might not live to see them used. And in the margins in his father's careful hand, a note that Jim had missed the first time. The land by the river, south-facing slope. This is the spot. This is where you build. Trust Lars. He knows the old ways, the ways that work. October 24th. Jim and Lars rode out to quarter section 14. The land spread before them, rolling prairie grass broken by a hillside that faced south, overlooking the Missouri River bottomlands 3 miles distant. The hill wasn't dramatic, just a long slope rising maybe 30 feet above the surrounding plain, but it was perfect. Lars dismounted slow, his old bones protesting. He stood looking at the hillside for a long moment, then nodded like he was confirming something he already knew. Your great-grandfather would choose this exact spot. Why, Lars pointed. South face, sun all day, even in winter. Hill protects from north winds, water below, drainage natural, and the earth here. He knelt, joints cracking, and dug his fingers into the soil. The sod came up in a mat grass, roots woven tight. Good sod, roots thick. Will cut into bricks that hold. How do you know all this? Because I built 3 hillside houses in Sweden before I came here, one when I was 15 after my father died. Lived in it 12 years. Never froze, never flooded, never collapsed. Jim stared at his grandfather, seeing him differently. Not as an old man clinging to outdated ways, but as someone who carried knowledge that America had forgotten in its rush to be modern, to be impressive, to be anything except practical. You've been planning this. Since your father died, I knew Jacob would move on, was when. Since your mother got sick, I knew you'd be alone. So yes, I planned. Lars pulled folded papers from his coat. Sketches, calculations, notes in Swedish. The handwriting shaky, but the concepts clear. I'm old Jim. My hands shake. My back hurts. I can't dig anymore. But I can teach, and you can dig. Jim looked at the designs, complex and simple at the same time. Cut into the hillside. Build walls of sod. Create an air gap for insulation. Slope the floor for drainage. Angle the chimney for draft. Use the earth's constant temperature as the foundation, add just enough fire to reach comfort. This is complicated, he said. Lars shook his head. No, this is simple. Americans make building complicated. Tall walls, fancy windows, painted wood. Swedes make it simple. Dig into earth, use what's free, stay warm. Which sounds smarter. Jim smiled for the first time since his mother died. Swedish. Damn right. That night, Jim studied his father's notebook with new understanding. Samuel Thornfield hadn't just copied ideas. He'd calculated them, tested them on paper, prepared them for his son. One page showed different roof angles with snow load calculations. Another showed thermal mass principles, explaining how Earth resisted temperature change. A third showed cost comparisons that made Jim's heart race. Timber house required $400 to $500. Most families didn't have that, couldn't get credit for it. Spent years paying off lumber debts while freezing through winters. Sod house needed $150 to $200. Better, but still required significant lumber for roof and door frames. Dugout could be built for $50 to $100. Everything else was labor and earth, free except for sweat. Jim had $340. If he reserved $200 for food, seed, tools, and emergencies, that left $140 for construction. Enough, barely, if he was careful. If he was smart, If he was lucky, but the timeline terrified him. Already late October, first deep freeze would come mid-November probably. He had 5 weeks, maybe 6 if winter was merciful, which it never was in Dakota Territory. 5 weeks to dig into a hillside, cut 247 sod bricks, build double walls with an air gap construct, a roof strong enough to hold 3 tons of snow, install a stove and chimney, make a door and windows slope, and pack a floor. Impossible for one man. Difficult for two when one of those men was 71 years old. Lars must have seen the fear in Jim's face. "We need help," the old man said. "You can't do this alone. We can't afford labor. 50 cents a day, 2 men, 5 weeks. That's $35 minimum. Then find men who work for less. Or men who work for other reasons. Like what? Pride, curiosity, boredom. Not everything is money, Jim." October 26, Jim rode to the Miller farmstead. He found Carl and Otto Miller repairing fence in the cold afternoon light. Carl was 18, broad-shouldered and strong in the way that comes from endless farm labor. Otto was 16, wiry and sharp-eyed with the look of someone who thought faster than he spoke. "I'm looking to hire help," Jim said from his saddle. "Construction work. 5, maybe 6 weeks." Carl straightened, interested. "Pay can't afford 50 cents a day. Can do 25 cents each." Otto laughed short and bitter. "Half rate for what? Digging ditches. Building a house. Into a hillside. Dugout style. A dirt house." Carl's tone held skepticism, but also curiosity. "An earth-sheltered dwelling. Warmer than timber, cheaper than stone, lasts longer than sod." "You're crazy," Otto said. "Maybe, but I'm also the only one offering wages right now. Your father's got 7 sons and 160 acres. How much inheritance you think you're getting?" Carl's face darkened. "Watch it." "I'm not insulting," Jim said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm stating facts. You need money. I need labor. 25 cents a day is better than 0. Why should we believe this dugout will even work? Because my grandfather built 3 in Sweden. Because my father studied it before he died. And because if it doesn't work, I'm the one who freezes, not you. You get paid either way." The brothers looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that siblings develop. "Show us the plans," Carl said. Jim pulled out his father's notebook, spread it on the fence post. Carl studied the drawings. He couldn't read well, but he understood diagrams, understood structure, understood load and stress. "This actually looks solid," he admitted. "The double wall with air gap, that's smart." Otto leaned in. "You really think this will be warmer than a timber house?" "I know it will. Question is whether you're brave enough to find out." Brave Otto's pride flared. "You're the one betting your life on it." "Exactly, so what's your excuse?" Silence stretched between them. Jim could see them calculating, weighing risk against reward, desperation against skepticism. "We're in," Carl said finally. "But 30 cents a day each. 25 is insulting." Jim did the math in his head. 30 cents times 2 men times 35 days was $21 total. He could afford it. Barely. Deal. "But you work full days, sunup to sundown." "We work full days anyway," Carl said. "At least this is interesting." They shook hands. Jim felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but possibility. As they were parting, Otto spoke quietly so his brother wouldn't hear. "Real reason I'm doing this. My father wants me to marry the Werner girl. 16, fat, stupid. Says it'll merge our land with theirs. I'd rather dig in dirt for 6 weeks than get trapped in that marriage. Your father can't force you. You don't know German fathers. But if I have my own money, I have options. So yeah, I'll dig your crazy hole. Because it's freedom." Jim understood. They were both escaping something, building towards something, refusing to accept the futures other people had planned for them. "Then let's build freedom," he said. October 28th, first day of construction, Jim, Lars, Carl, and Otto met at the claim at sunrise. The morning was cold, the grass brittle with frost, the sky that pale blue that promised winter wasn't far away. Carl looked at the hillside. "So where do we start?" Lars gestured. "First we mark the outline." Jim hammered stakes into the ground. 12 feet wide, 16 feet deep into the hillside, 8 feet back into the earth itself. Not large, not impressive, but sufficient. A space for 1 man to survive. Maybe 2. "That's smaller than I thought," Otto said. "It's for 1 person. Maybe 2. I don't need a mansion. Fair enough. So we dig, you dig, I supervise. Lars settled himself on a flat rock. Old bones don't dig anymore, Otto muttered under his breath. Great, the old man supervises while we work. Lars's hearing was better than his body. The old man knows where to dig so the roof doesn't collapse on your head. You want to learn or you want to die, stupid? Otto reddened. Learn. Good. Then dig. They dug. The Dakota earth was packed, solid, dense, with decades of grass roots hard as brick in places. By noon, Jim's hands were blistered. Carl and Otto were sweating despite the cold. Lars called lunch. Jim shared bread and dried meat. They sat on the hillside looking at the shallow trench they'd started, and Jim felt doubt creep in. This was impossible. Too much work, too little time, too few hands. Carl must have seen it in his face. You're working as hard as us. Most guys who hire help just watch. It's my house. Why would I watch someone else build it? Fair point. Otto wiped sweat from his forehead. Your grandfather really built these in Sweden, Lars said. First when I was 15. Lived in it until I was 27. Never froze, never flooded, never collapsed. Then I came to America and forgot everything I knew. Stupid. Why'd you forget? Because Americans said their way was better, bigger, taller, more impressive. I wanted to fit in, but impressive doesn't mean warm. Your children don't care if the house looks American if they're freezing inside it. Carl nodded slowly. My father's house is cold. Stone-thick walls cost him $300. Still cold, because stone is dense. Dense is cold. Earth is porous. Porous holds air. Air insulates. Your father built with pride, not physics. Carl laughed. I'll tell him you said that. Please do, Lars said. Something shifted in that moment. The work stopped being just labor. It became teaching, learning, building something together. Not just a house, understanding. November 2nd, day 5 of excavation. They'd dug 8 feet into the hillside 3 feet down. The hole was starting to look like something. Not a house yet, but the possibility of one. Magnus Thorsen rode over. He was a thick Norwegian, 42 years old with 3 failed houses behind him. His current house, his third attempt, had cost $400 and still left his family shivering through winter nights. So you're the boy building into the ground, he said, dismounting. Jim straightened, covered in dirt. I'm the man building into the earth. You must be Magnus Thorsen. You know me. Everyone knows you. 3 houses, each one more expensive than the last. Magnus's face reddened. Building is hard here. Weather is harsh, or maybe you're building wrong. The Norwegian's eyes narrowed. Watch your mouth, boy. I've been here 3 years. You've been here 3 days. Lars stepped between them. He's been learning 71 years. From people who built in cold worse than Dakota. You want to listen, or you want to stay proud and cold? Magnus recognized elder status softened slightly. You're Swedish Dalarna region. You, Stavanger, Norway. My grandfather built into hillsides too. Then why didn't you? Magnus paused and Jim saw something honest cross his face. I forgot. Came to new land, wanted to build like Americans. Show I belonged. And how's that working? I'm burning 40 pounds of wood a day and still cold. Jim will burn 6 pounds and stay warm. Watch. Magnus studied the excavation, the careful measurements, the double wall design that Lars was explaining to Carl. The earth will collapse, Magnus said. Weight of dirt will crush the roof. 6 lodgepole pine timbers, 8 inches diameter. Rated for 3 tons. We're putting on 3 tons. Math works, and cold air sinks. You'll be in a hole collecting all the cold. Lars shook his head. Cold air is lighter than warm air. It rises. You have it backwards. That's not true. Go home. Light a candle. Watch the smoke. It goes up, yes, because hot is lighter than cold. Now think about your argument again. Magnus opened his mouth closed. It realized he was wrong. Still, he tried again the moisture. Underground is damp. You'll have mold. Floor slopes 1 inch per 6 feet, Jim said. Water drains to entrance. We ventilate daily. Moisture escapes. You calculated the slope. My father did, before he died. Magnus's expression changed. Samuel was your father. I heard he passed. Good man. He was. And he was smart. Smarter than people gave him credit for. Magnus stood there for a long moment, pride wrestling with curiosity. Finally, he mounted his horse. "I'll watch," he said. "If it works, maybe I'll ask questions." "Fair enough." After he left, Carl spoke. "You made an enemy there." "No, I challenged his pride. Different thing. Seems the same to me." Lars settled back onto his rock. A man whose pride is challenged has two choices: fight or learn. Magnus chose learn. That makes him an ally, not an enemy. How do you know he chose learn? Because he came back a second time. First time week ago, he laughed and rode away. Today he stayed, asked questions, thought about answers. That's learning. Jim hadn't known about the first visit. "You saw him before a week ago. You were in town buying timber. He saw the stakes, laughed, said you'd be dead by January. I told him to come back and check. He did. That's progress." Carl shook his head, smiling. "You're a sneaky old man. I'm a smart old man. Sneaky is what young people call smart when they don't understand it yet." November 3rd through 12th, cutting sod bricks. This was the hardest labor Jim had ever done. Dakota sod was perfect for building blue stem and buffalo grass roots woven tight through decades of growth. But perfect didn't mean easy. Each brick had to be exactly 36 inches long, 12 inches wide, 6 inches thick. Each brick weighed 45 pounds. They needed 247 bricks total. Carl and Otto's arms nearly fell off. Jim's hands bled through the blisters, forming calluses on top of calluses. Even Lars helped where he could, marking cutting lines, checking dimensions, offering that sharp-tongued encouragement that somehow made the work bearable. "This is hell," Otto gasped on day 3, his hands bloody. "This is survival," Jim said. His own hands looked just as bad. "Same thing out here." Lars supervised the wall building. Front wall 28 inches thick at the base, tapering to 20 inches at the top. Perfect angle for load distribution. Then the crucial element, the 2-foot air gap. Dead airspace. The secret that American builders had forgotten. "The double wall is brilliant," Carl admitted one evening, too tired to stand. "I don't understand why, but I can see it's right. Air doesn't conduct heat," Lars explained. "Wood does, stone does, earth does, but slowly. Air. Almost not at all. That 2 feet of still air is worth more than 4 feet of solid earth." Interior wall went up next. 12 inches thick, solid, strong, creating a cavity that would resist heat loss better than any amount of expensive lumber. November 14th, wall construction complete. Time for the roof. Jim rode to Yankton with $60 cash for 6 lodgepole pine timbers. 8-inch diameter, 12 feet long. The critical element. If the roof failed, everything failed. The lumber dealer was Samuel Pike, a businessman in his 50s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. "I need 6 lodgepole pine timbers," Jim said. 8-inch diameter, 12 feet long. Pike checked his inventory. "Got 4 in stock. Can order 2 more, be here in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I need them now. Winter's coming, sorry son. That's the best I can do." Jim felt panic rising. "What about smaller diameter, 7-inch? "Got those. But 7-inch won't hold the load you're describing. Not safe." "What if I use 8 timbers instead of 6, distribute the load?" "Maybe, but 8 timbers at $8 each is $64. You said your budget is 60. I'll find the extra 4. Pike leaned forward, lowered his voice. "Or I got 6 timbers, 8-inch, perfect size. But they're second grade, some cracks, some warping. Can't sell them full price. $50 for all 6. If they're cracked, they'll fail under load. Not if you know which way to lay them. Cracks vertical, they hold. Cracks horizontal, they split. You smart enough to figure that out." Jim thought about his father's notebook. Pages about wood grain and loading direction. Ways to read timber like a language. "Yeah, I can figure it out." Then we got a deal. They shook hands. Jim saved $10 but gained significant risk. He rode home with 6 timbers strapped to a borrowed wagon, heart pounding, wondering if he'd just bought his own death. Lars inspected the timbers and frowned. "These are second grade, I know. If we lay them wrong, roof collapses. Kills us in our sleep. Then we don't lay them wrong." The old man studied his grandson, then nodded slowly. "Your father would approve. Smart risk, not stupid risk." Carl and Otto helped unload. Carl saw the cracks and went pale. "Jim, these aren't safe." "They are if we orient them correctly. Cracks run vertical, parallel to load. They'll hold, and if you're wrong, then I die and you collect your wages from my grandfather. Dio, that's not funny. Wasn't joking. This is the risk. You want out, leave now. No shame. The brothers looked at each other, having another of those silent conversations. We stay, Carl said. Yeah, Otto agreed. We stay. But if that roof kills us, I'm haunting you. Fair. November 15th, evening. The roof timbers lay across the walls, positioned according to grain and crack direction. Jim, Lars, Carl, and Otto stood back, looking up at 6 pieces of second-grade lumber that would either shelter them or crush them. Tomorrow we test, Lars said. Put on willow branches, canvas sod. 3 tons. If it holds, we live. If it fails, it'll hold, Jim said. How do you know? Carl asked. Because my father calculated it, my grandfather verified it, and I trust them more than I trust my doubts. That's faith, not engineering, Otto said. Lars looked at the timbers, at the careful placement, at the vertical cracks that would hold instead of split. Sometimes they're the same thing. November 16th. Sunrise came cold and clear, the kind of morning where breath hung visible in the air, and frost turned the prairie grass into a field of silver needles. Jim woke before dawn, couldn't sleep, kept seeing those 6 cracked timbers in his mind. Second-grade lumber, $50 instead of $60, a gamble that could save $10 or cost 3 lives. Lars was already awake, sitting by the small fire in the claim shack where they'd been sleeping during construction. The old man's hands shook as he poured coffee, not from fear, but from age, from 71 years of hard living, catching up with bones and joints. Today we find out if your father's calculations were right, Lars said. They were right. Confidence is good. Overconfidence kills. Then I'll be carefully confident. Carl and Otto arrived at first light, both looking nervous. They'd spent the evening telling their father about the roof test, and Heinrich Miller had responded with typical German pessimism. You're helping that boy kill himself. When the roof collapses, don't come crying to me. But they came anyway, because they'd invested 5 weeks of labor. Because they wanted to see if this crazy idea would actually work. Because somewhere in the digging and the sod cutting and the wall building, they'd started to believe. The process was methodical. Willow branches first woven tight across the 6 timbers. Lars supervised checking each placement, making sure the weave was tight enough to support the layers above, but loose enough to allow some flex. Canvas next. $8 worth of heavy fabric stretched across the willow framework. This layer would keep soil from filtering through, would create a moisture barrier, would add one more element of insulation. Then the sod, 2 layers each 7 inches thick. 14 inches total of prairie earth grass roots woven through it like rebar and concrete. Each brick 45 pounds. They'd need approximately 60 bricks for the roof, 2,700 pounds. Add snow load. Dakota winter could dump 3-4 feet of snow. Another 1,500 pounds easy. Total weight on those 6 cracked timbers. 3 tons, maybe more. They worked in silence, each man alone with his thoughts. Jim placed each sod brick with care, checking that it sat level, that weight distributed evenly. Carl and Otto hauled bricks from the stockpile, their arms burning from weeks of this labor, their hands wrapped in cloth to protect the calluses. Lars watched from his rock, offering occasional direction. A little more to the left. That one's sitting crooked. Good, that's good. After 50 bricks, Otto paused. The timbers are creaking. Wood creaks, Lars said. It's breathing under load. Normal. After 100 bricks, Carl stopped breathing hard. That crack in timber 3, it's opening. Jim climbed up, inspected the crack. It had widened maybe 1/8 of an inch, but still ran vertical, still parallel to the load direction. Still vertical, still safe. Keep going. After 150 bricks, they were all sweating despite the November cold. The roof was taking shape, a gentle slope from back to front, 2 inches of drop per foot of run. Enough to shed snow and rain. Not so much that sod would slide. 200 bricks, 220, 240. The final brick went into place at 2:17 in the afternoon. Everyone stepped back, waited, nobody breathed. The timbers creaked, settled, groaned under 3 tons of earth and sea, and held. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15. Lars finally stood, walked to the dugout entrance, placed his hand on the nearest timber, felt it solid and strong beneath his palm. It holds, he said. Otto exhaled like he'd been punched. Jesus Christ, it holds. Carl started laughing not from humor, but from relief from the release of tension they'd all been carrying. I hope, but Jim said nothing, just stood looking at what they'd built. 8 feet into a hillside, 12 feet wide, 16 feet deep, double walls with a 2-foot air gap, 6 cracked timbers holding 3 tons without complaint, a floor that would drain water, a space that would hold warmth. His father's design, his grandfather's knowledge, his own hands and sweat and blood. But Lars wasn't celebrating yet. Now we proved, the old man said. Holding for 15 minutes means nothing. Holding for 5 months means everything. That afternoon, Magnus Thorson rode over with another man. Thomas Barrett, 48 years old, German accent, thick master mason from Hamburg. His stone house had cost $370 and still left his family cold. Magnus had brought him to see the impossible, the boy who thinks he can outsmart winter. Thomas walked around the structure with the focused attention of a craftsman evaluating another's work. He tested the sod wall stability. Solid. Examined the double wall air gap. Impressed despite himself. Checked the floor slope with a level he'd brought. Perfect 1 inch per 6 feet. Studied the roof timber placement. Then he saw the cracks. These timbers are second grade. Cracked, oriented correctly, Jim said. Cracks vertical to load vector. You know load vectors. I know if I orient them wrong, I die. That's motivation to learn. Thomas almost smiled. The slope calculation. Who did this at my father? Before he died, Samuel Thornfield was a logger. He was also a thinker. Apparently. The moisture problem, though, underground everything is damp. Mold rot, sickness. Lars stepped forward. Floor slopes, water drains. We ventilate daily. Moisture escapes, in theory. In practice, I lived in 3 of these, 12 years in one. No mold, no rot, no sickness. We're Sweden. Dalarna region. This isn't Sweden. Earth is earth, cold is cold. Physics doesn't care about geography. Thomas looked at Magnus, then back at Jim. When you move in 4 days, December 20th, I'll visit. Check if you're alive or frozen. I'll be alive. Confidence or stupidity, time will tell. After they left, Otto spoke. That went better than expected. He didn't laugh, Jim said. That's progress. Low bar, Carl added. Progress is progress, Lars said. Take what you can get. November 17th through 20th. The final 4 days. Chimney installation. The cast iron stove cost $23, nearly ate the entire remaining budget. But without it, the thermal mass principle wouldn't work. The earth would hold 52 degrees. They needed another 12-15 degrees to reach comfort. The stove would provide that. Positioning mattered. Back corner where the chimney could angle through the hillside at 30 degrees. 9 feet through clay-lined tunnel emerging 12 feet above the roof line. Why the angle, Otto asked as they dug the chimney tunnel. Creates draft, Lars explained. Hot air rises naturally, but angle helps. And clay absorbs heat, warms the earth around it, warms the dugout. Nothing wasted. They lined the tunnel with clay mixed from earth and water, smooth and tight. Installed the stovepipe, sealed every joint. 1 spark, 1 crack, 1 gap could fill the dugout with smoke or carbon monoxide. Door came next. 4 inches of cottonwood planks, thick and heavy. Leather hinges because metal was expensive and leather worked fine if you treated it right. The crucial detail was direction. Opens inward, always inward. Why inward, Carl asked. Snowlar said. Drift piles against door you can't push outward, but you can always pull inward. Small detail. Saves lives. 2 windows salvaged from a homesteader who'd given up and gone back east. $12 for both, a luxury Jim almost couldn't afford, but Lars insisted. You need light. Depression kills faster than cold sometimes. They set the windows deep in the sod walls. The 2-foot wall thickness created natural light wells, tunnels that caught sun and channeled it inward. Floor was last. Packed earth mixed with water and ashes, then tramped hard by all 4 men walking in circles for hours. Their feet were the tools, their weight the force. Tramp, tramp, tramp until the earth was hard as stone, then swept with fine sand for smoothness. Total cost, $197, $3 under budget. December 20th, 1876. Move-in day. Jim and Lars carried their belongings from the claim shack to the dugout. Not much. A rope bed frame with straw mattress, father's tool trunk, mother's Bible and sewing kit, Lars's Swedish books, 3 volumes he'd carried from the old country, food supplies, cornmeal, salt pork beans, rice coffee, 2 cords of wood stacked inside the entrance, 18 gallons of water in barrels, 4 chickens in a crate still laying despite the December cold because they'd be inside warm. The space was small, 192 square feet, everything they needed, nothing they didn't. At 4 in the afternoon, Jim lit the first fire in the cast iron stove. Temperature inside the dugout was 48 degrees. Outside was 12 degrees, 36-degree differential with no active heating. The fire caught groove filled the stove, heat radiated outward, 4:30, inside temperature 55 degrees. 5 o'clock, 62 degrees, 5:30, 64 degrees. Jim stopped adding wood at 5:30. Let the fire burn down to coals. The temperature held at 64 degrees for the next 8 hours. Lars sat on the rope bed, hands on his knees, and for the first time in weeks, his face relaxed. Your great-grandfather would be proud. You think I know, because I'm proud, and I'm harder to impress than he was. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for listening. Most young men don't. They sat in silence, feeling the warmth that came from everywhere and nowhere. Not the fierce, dry heat of a wood stove running hard, but a gentle, encompassing warmth that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The walls radiated it. The floor held it. The air wrapped them in it. Outside, 12 degrees and dropping. Inside, 64 degrees and stable. Your father should be here, Lars said quietly. He is. In every calculation, every measurement, every brick. Good answer. December 21st through 23rd. 3 days of testing. The cold snap hit dropped nighttime temperatures to 6 below zero. Jim's routine developed naturally. Wake at 6 to a dugout that measured 58 degrees with no fire burning overnight. Add 4 or 5 pounds of wood. Stoke the coals. Watch temperature climb to 65 degrees within 30 minutes. Hold steady all day with minimal attention. Total wood consumption, 6, maybe 7 pounds per day. Meanwhile, 3 miles north, Magnus Thorson was burning 35 pounds per day, and still his family shivered. 2 miles east, Thomas Barrett's stone house was sweating condensation despite 50 pounds of wood per day, his children sleeping in coats, because the cold was inescapable. December 23rd evening, Carl and Otto arrived to collect final wages. Jim paid them. $21 total, plus $5 bonus, $26 cash bonus. Carl looked surprised. You worked hard. You earned it. Our father wants to know if this actually works, Otto said. Come inside, see for yourself. They entered. The warmth hit them immediately, a physical presence after the brutal cold outside. Jesus, Carl breathed. It's warmer than our house. Way warmer, Otto added. Your father's house, Lars asked from his seat by the stove. Stone cost $300. Still cold. Dense stone is cold. Porous earth is warm. Tell your father. He won't listen. Then he'll freeze in his expensive house while Jim stays warm in his cheap one. Pride is expensive. Can we bring our father here? Show him. Carl's voice held a note of desperation. Our youngest sister, she coughs all winter. The cold is killing her slowly. Anytime. He'll say it's luck, Otto predicted. Then let him freeze lucky. After they left, Lars spoke. Think they'll tell people, yes, and people won't believe them until they freeze. Then they'll believe. That's a harsh way to teach. That's the only way some people learn. December 24th, Christmas Eve. A knock on the door startled both Jim and Lars. Edward Winters stood outside, 32 years old, school teacher from Wisconsin, natural philosophy degree from a small college nobody had heard of. He held a notebook and what looked like scientific instruments. Jim Thornfield. Yes, I'm Edward Winters. I teach at the Territorial School. I heard about your construction project. May I come in? Why scientific interest? What you've built, if it works, demonstrates principles of thermal mass heat, transfer energy conservation. I'd like to document it, Lars called from inside. Let him in. Scientists are useful. Edward entered, immediately pulled out a thermometer. Outside temperature, he said, checking. -14 Fahrenheit. Inside temperature, he checked his instrument. 63 Fahrenheit, 77-degree differential. He looked around. Minimal fire, thin walls, small space. This shouldn't be possible. Shouldn't be, but is, Lars said from his chair. That's science, yes, yes, exactly. May I take measurements, track temperatures over time? What's in it for me, Jim asked. Knowledge. If this works, I can help spread it. Write articles, teach others. Save lives. And if it fails, then we learn what doesn't work. Also valuable, you can measure, but don't interfere. Deal. Edward set up instruments, started logging data, outside temp, inside temp, fire consumption, earth temperature at various depths. Earth temperature at 6 feet depth, he asked. 52 degrees, Lars answered. Always. Summer, winter doesn't matter. Fascinating. You're using the earth as a thermal battery. We're using earth as earth. You scientists complicate everything. Edward laughed. Fair. He spent an hour taking notes, filling pages with numbers and observations. Then he sat back, looked at Jim with something like awe. You've proven something important here. Most settlers fight winter. You're letting the earth fight it for you. My grandfather's idea. Your grandfather's memory, Lars corrected. My grandfather's idea. Your great-great-grandfather's idea. Ideas don't belong to one person. They flow through generations like water through stone. Edward wrote that down word for word. December 26th afternoon. Frank Morrison appeared. He was 55, weathered like old leather, a trader who'd been running routes through Dakota Territory for 20 years. He'd seen more winters than most people survived. He knew weather the way some men knew cars or horses or women. You're the Thornfield boy, he asked. Jim Thornfield. Yes. Heard you built into a hill. Wanted to see if you were still alive. Still alive. Frank looked around, saw the thin smoke from the chimney, the snow starting to drift against the hillside. You got supplies. Food, wood, water. Enough. Define enough. 4 months food, 3/4 cordwood, 18 gallons water, chickens laying. Chickens, in this cold, inside the dugout. They're warm, they lay. Frank's eyebrows rose. Smart. But you're gonna need more. Big storm coming, day after tomorrow. How big? Worst in 10 years. Maybe longer. Edward, who'd been taking evening measurements, looked up. What are the indicators? Frank rattled them off like a man reading a familiar text. Sky patterns, clouds from northwest moving slow heavy, barometric pressure dropping. I can feel it in my teeth. Animals acting strange. Birds flew south yesterday all at once. My knee hasn't hurt this bad since the '67 blizzard that killed 15 people. When exactly, Jim asked. December 29th, probably early morning. It'll drop to 40 below, maybe colder. Wind like you've never seen. Last 3-4 days. Lars spoke from inside the dugout. We're ready. Frank studied the old man. Old-timer, I've seen men with twice your supplies freeze to death. This isn't about being ready. This is about being smart enough to leave. I'm 71. If I'm going to die, I'd rather die warm in my own house than cold in someone else's charity. And you, Frank turned to Jim. You're 17. You got a life ahead of you. Don't throw it away on pride. It's not pride. It's proof. Proof of what? That my father was right, that my grandfather is right, that building into earth works better than building against wind. And if you're wrong, then I die learning. But I don't think I'm wrong. Frank studied Jim's face, saw the determination there, the intelligence, the stubbornness that was either wisdom or fatal stupidity. I gave you warning. If we find you dead, that's on you, not me. Understood. Frank looked at Edward. You're staying too for science. You're all crazy. He mounted his horse. Good luck. After Frank left, Jim felt doubt creep in for the first time since they'd started building. 40 below, 3-4 days, the worst storm in 10 years. What if they were wrong? What if the calculations failed? What if the timber cracked? What if the chimney blocked? What if the earth couldn't hold enough warmth? Lars saw it in his face. Your father calculated for 45 below. We're built for worse than what's coming. How do you know? Because Samuel was careful. Because he calculated 3 times and checked 4 times. Because he built an extra margin everywhere. 6 timbers instead of 4. Double walls instead of single. Clay chimney liner instead of bare metal. Your father prepared for the worst and hoped for the best. Edward added his own reassurance. The thermal mass principle is sound. The earth at 6 feet depth won't change temperature no matter what happens above ground. You're surrounded by a battery that holds at 52 degrees. Add small fire, you reach 65. The math works, but Jim couldn't shake the fear. Because math was one thing, reality was another. And reality was coming in 3 days with wind and cold that could kill them in minutes if they were wrong. December 27th, eerie calm. The sky turned that yellow-gray color that meant something bad was building. Temperature rose to -12, which Frank had said was a warning sign. Animals went silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Jim, Lars, and Edward prepared methodically. Stack extra wood inside. Fill all water barrels. Check chimney clearance. Test door seal. Secure windows. Cook extra food in case the fire went out and they couldn't restart it. Meanwhile, across the territory, other families prepared differently. Magnus Thorson stacked firewood outside his house. Cord after cord, enough to last weeks. But he didn't think about access. Didn't realize that snow would bury it, that he wouldn't be able to reach it when the storm hit. Thomas Barrett reinforced his stone walls, adding extra mortar ceiling cracks. Useless against cold. The problem wasn't gaps. It was thermal mass of the wrong kind. Dense stone that held cold as effectively as it held heat. Reverend Ashford nailed boards over his windows thinking he was keeping cold out. Actually, he was just blocking light, making his family's ordeal darker without making it warmer. Edward took final pre-storm measurements. Outside, -12 Fahrenheit, but rising. Inside the dugout, 61 degrees. Barometric pressure, 29.1 inches and dropping fast. Earth temperature at 6 feet depth, 52 degrees, unchanging eternal. Storm hits in less than 12 hours, he said. We're ready, Jim repeated. But he didn't feel ready. He felt terrified. No one is ready for what's coming, Lars said. But we're prepared. Different thing. December 29th, 1876. 2:17 in the morning. Jim woke to a sound that wasn't wind. Something worse. A roar that seemed to come from the earth itself, from the sky, from everywhere and nowhere. The sound of nature forgetting that humans existed, that anything existed except cold and fury and the ancient war between winter and survival. The dugout shuddered. Dust sifted down from between the roof sods. For one terrifying moment, Jim thought the whole structure would collapse, 3 tons of earth and snow crashing down on them. But the timbers held. Cracked second-grade $50 lumber held against forces that were tearing apart houses that cost 10 times as much. Lars was already awake. It's here. Edward scrambled for his instruments. Barometer dropped 4 inches in 2 hours. This is unprecedented. Outside thermometer read -35 degrees and dropping. Inside 54 degrees. The wind was pulling heat through microscopic gaps, through imperfections in the sod, through any path it could find. Jim stoked the fire, added wood, watched the temperature climb to 61 degrees. Edward logged everything with shaking hands. 2:17 a.m. Outside -35, at inside 54, wind 65 miles per hour plus. 2:45 a.m. Outside at -38, inside 61 after stoking. 3:15 a.m. Outside -40, wind 75 miles per hour plus. 4 a.m. and outside -42, inside 59. Wind screaming. Snow came horizontal past the windows. Couldn't see 3 feet. The world had become white death erasure, the end of everything. Drift formed against the door. Good thing it opened inward. That small detail, that decision Lars had insisted on, was the difference between trapped and free. Jim, Lars, and Edward settled in to wait. This is what separates men from boys, Lars said quietly. Not strength, not courage. Preparation. You scared, Jim asked. Terrified. You same. Edward checked his instruments. This is either brilliant or suicide. Often the same thing, Lars observed. 6 a.m. Outside -42. Inside 57 degrees. They ate breakfast, cornmeal coffee, simple, warm enough. The fire barely smoked. 6 pounds of wood so far. Somewhere out there, Magnus was burning 40 pounds and still freezing. Thomas's children were crying from cold. Reverend Ashford's wife was going into hypothermia. People were dying. Jim, Lars, and Edward were warm-fed safe. 11:30 a.m. The crack came sharp and loud, unmistakable. One of the 6 roof timbers split. Edward's face went white. We need to shore it up. Jim was already moving. Help me with the bed. They positioned the rope bed frame under the cracked timber, stacked firewood on it for height, braced the timber with spare willow branches Lars had insisted they keep. Jim climbed up. Packed the crack with clay from emergency supplies. His hands went numb in seconds despite the indoor warmth, the stress and adrenaline overwhelming his body's heat. Careful, Lars warned. Always am. He packed the crack, climbed down. Leak stopped. Timber held. Temperature had held at 57 degrees through the entire crisis. Fire never went out. Walls never cracked. Floor stayed dry. If you'd used 4 timbers instead of 6, Edward said, voice shaking, we'd be dead. Redundancy saves lives. Your father wanted 4 timbers, Lars said. Save money. I told him 6. He listened. He was smart. He trusted people smarter than him. That's smarter. They sat hearts pounding alive. We're going to make it, Edward said. Don't jinx it. We're 8 hours in. 3 more days to go. Then we don't think about 3 days, Lars said. We think about 3 hours. Then 3 more. Then 3 more. Survival is patience. December 29th, 10 p.m. 20 hours into the storm. Edward checked instruments. Outside, minus 43 degrees. Record low. Inside, 56 degrees, holding. Wind 85 miles per hour sustained. Snow accumulation 6 feet plus. Temperatures still dropping outside, he said. Inside, holding at 56. The thermal mass is resisting the temperature change exactly as predicted. Lars looked at the cracked timber still holding. Looked at his grandson, 17 years old, and keeping them alive with knowledge passed down through 4 generations. Your great-grandfather built in Sweden. Your grandfather remembered in America. Your father calculated and documented. You built and survived. And Edward here records it all. 5 generations of knowledge in one storm. Edward wrote it down. Then he looked at Jim. I need to tell you something. What if this works, and I think it will, your life is going to change. People will want this. They'll need this. Are you ready for that? I just want to survive the next 3 days. And after Jim looked at his grandfather across the lamplight, outside screaming white death tried to erase them from existence. Inside warmth, stability, life. I haven't thought about after. I've only thought about surviving. Maybe it's time to think about after, Edward said. The wind screamed louder as if winter itself was offended by the idea that anyone could think beyond the next frozen breath. December 30th, morning of the second day, outside minus 44 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the dugout, 55 degrees. The wind was worse than the first day. Sustained 95 miles per hour, gusts probably higher. The sound had changed from a roar to something higher, thinner, more vicious. Like the storm had found a new gear, a deeper reserve of fury it had been saving. Snowdrifts reached 12 feet against the hillside above them. Jim could see it through the small window, a wall of white that kept building, kept rising, threatening to bury them completely. But they were 8 feet into the earth. The snow could pile to 20 feet, and they'd still have clearance. Lars coughed, a wet, rattling sound that he tried to hide by turning his head away. You all right, Jim asked. Old lungs, old bones, don't worry about me. But Jim did worry. His grandfather was 71. This winter, this storm, the weeks of hard labor building the dugout, and all of it was taking a toll that showed in the tremor of his hands, the slowness of his movements, the cough he couldn't quite suppress. Edward maintained their routine with scientific precision. 6 a.m. stoke, fire, cook cornmeal. 7 a.m. take measurements. 8 a.m. check chimney, check door seal, check windows. 10 a.m. check structural integrity. Noon small meal. 2 p.m. Edward taught thermodynamics while Lars told stories about Sweden. 4 p.m. Jim read his father's notebook. 6 p.m. cooked dinner together. 8 p.m. Edward wrote observations, Lars and Jim talked. 10 p.m. bank fire for sleep. The rhythm kept them sane, kept them from thinking too hard about what was happening outside, about the families who weren't as prepared, about the people who were dying right now, freezing in houses that cost more and protected less. Conversation turned to fathers the way it often did in the long hours. Tell me about Samuel, Edward said. He was quiet, Jim answered. Worked hard, loved my mother, died too young. Lars spoke from his bed where he'd been resting more and more. He was stubborn. Like you, wouldn't listen until he understood why. Then he'd listen forever. He calculated all of this before he died, Jim said. The floor slope, the roof angles, the thermal mass. Everything, the notebook, Edward said. May I see it again? Jim handed it over. Edward turned pages with reverent care, reading Samuel Thornfield's precise handwriting, studying the sketches and calculations. He knew he might not live to build it, Edward observed. So he made sure you could. That's what fathers do, Lars said. They prepare sons for survival without them. Did your father prepare you? Jim asked. He taught me to build into hillsides, to trust earth over air, to remember when others forget. Yes, he prepared me. And I'm preparing you. For what? For when I'm gone. You'll need to teach others. The Carl Millers, the Otto Millers, the sons who don't have smart fathers. I'm 17. Age doesn't make a teacher. Knowledge does. And you have knowledge people need. Temperature logs told the story. 6 a.m. inside 53 degrees, outside minus 44. Noon inside 62 degrees with fire, outside minus 42. 6 p.m. inside 59 degrees, outside minus 43. Midnight inside 56 degrees, outside minus 41. Wood consumption 8 pounds. Slightly more than usual because of the extreme cold, but still a fraction of what conventional houses required. Your thermal mass is performing beyond my calculations, Edward said. The earth is actively warming the space. In English, Jim asked, your house is alive, and it's protecting you. December 31st, morning of the third day, 6:47 a.m. Jim woke to silence, complete total eerie silence. Edward was already awake. It stopped 2 hours ago, outside minus 44 degrees. No wind. Air like crystal so cold it felt solid. Inside 55 degrees. Jim opened the door to a world transformed. Snowdrifts 10 to 12 feet high. Their chimney barely visible above the white. No tracks, no movement, no sound. The entire prairie looked like it had never been inhabited, like humans had never existed here, like the storm had erased every trace of occupation. We need to check on neighbors, Jim said. Too cold, Edward warned. Wait until afternoon. Minus 44 with no wind, you can freeze exposed skin in 2 minutes. But at 9:30 a.m. pounding on the door, Otto Miller staggered in half frozen. His face was white except for bright red spots on his cheeks and nose. Frostbite starting. Thomas Barrett's daughter. He gasped. Frostbite. Bad. My father sent me. Can you help? Jim grabbed the basic medical supplies his mother had kept. Bandages, salve, whiskey for disinfecting. Don't go, Lars said from his bed. Too cold. You'll die. A 6-year-old is dying. I'm going. Then bundle up. Move fast. Don't stop. Edward stayed behind to keep the fire going. Jim and Otto trudged through drifts. The cold was incomprehensible. Breathing deeply hurt. The air felt like knives in the lungs. Exposed skin burned, then went numb, then burned again. 40 minutes to cover a distance that normally took 15. By the time they reached Thomas Barrett's stone house, Jim couldn't feel his hands or feet. Inside, the temperature was 32 degrees. Freezing, literally freezing. Sarah Barrett, 6 years old, lay on a bed with both feet wrapped in blankets. When Thomas unwrapped them, Jim had to suppress a gasp. Her feet were black. Not dark, black. Tissue death. Frostbite so severe that no amount of warming would save the damaged areas. We burned everything, Thomas said. His voice was broken, defeated. Furniture, floorboards, my tools. Still not enough. His wife Greta sat in the corner crying without sound. Jim examined Sarah's feet with hands that barely worked from his own exposure. She'll lose toes, maybe more. You need a doctor. Can't get to town. Snow too deep. Roads impassable. Then keep her feet elevated. Don't warm too fast. Tissue damage gets worse. Wrap in clean cloth. I'll send Edward for a doctor when roads clear. Greta looked up, tears frozen on her face. Your house. Otto said it's warm. Is that true? Yes. How we spent $300 on stone. You spent what? 100 less, about 200 total. Thomas's face was ash. I'm a master mason, 40 years experience. And I built a house that's killing my daughter. You built what you knew. You couldn't have known different. You knew different. You're 17. I listened to people who knew. My grandfather, my father. That's all. I'm a proud man, Jim. Thomas's voice cracked. Too proud. And pride is expensive. He looked at his daughter's blackened feet. Too expensive. Jim left a quarter quart of firewood. Precious, irreplaceable, but what else could he do? I'll come back tomorrow. Check on her. Why? Thomas asked. You don't owe us anything. Because she's 6. And she didn't choose to be in a cold house. Walking back with Otto, the younger Miller brother spoke quietly. You just saved my father's pride, too. How he wanted to ask for help. Wanted to learn from you. But he's German, stubborn. Seeing you help Thomas, seeing you give firewood that breaks something in him. Makes it possible to ask without losing face. Your father doesn't need to lose face. He just needs to let his daughter live. Same thing to a German father. But you made it easier. January 1st, 1877. The storm ended. Community gathered at Magnus Thorson's house. The count came in slowly. 4 dead. Henrik and Olaf Jensen brothers, 68 and 71. Ran out of wood, froze in their beds together. Found holding hands. William and Margaret Pierce couple in their 20s. Disoriented in the whiteout, froze 50 yards from their own front door. Rescue party found them the next morning, frozen solid, still holding each other. Daniel Harper's infant son, 9 months old, couldn't maintain body heat in a drafty claim shack. Died the second night despite everything his father tried. 3 near deaths. Sarah Barrett frostbite would lose toes. Caroline Ashford hypothermia and convulsions survived barely. A child at the Sullivan homestead, same story. Jim Thornfield, unharmed, well-fed, rested. Lars Thornfield, unharmed. 71 years old, survived better than men half his age. Edward Winters, unharmed. 23 pages of scientific documentation. Magnus stood before the assembled families and spoke with the weight of a man who'd learned humility the hard way. Jim Thornfield's dugout stayed 60 degrees through the entire storm, used maybe 10 pounds of wood per day. My house, 40 pounds per day, still freezing. A man from the back, someone Jim didn't know, called out, "That's impossible." "I thought so too," Magnus said. "But I visited. It's possible. It's luck." Another voice, Lars stood, 71 years old, shaking from age but steady in voice. "Luck is random. This is physics. Earth at 6 feet depth stays 52 degrees year-round. Build into Earth, you're surrounded by 52-degree battery. Add small fire reach 65. Simple." Daniel Harper stood, the man who'd lost his infant son. His face was destroyed, hollow, aged 20 years and 3 days. If it's so simple, why didn't anyone tell us Lars's voice was gentle but unforgiving? "I told Magnus 2 years ago." He laughed. "Thomas, I told you last year. You said Swedish ways were primitive. Reverend, I told you at church. You said earth dwellings were unchristian. I told you. You didn't listen." Silence fell like another kind of snow. Brutal truth that nobody wanted to hear, but everybody needed to. Magnus spoke quietly. "He's right, I didn't listen." Thomas Barrett, attending despite his daughter's condition, added his voice. "None of us did." But Daniel Harper wasn't ready for acceptance. His grief was too fresh, too raw. "My son is dead. Your grandson is alive. And you're telling me it's my fault for not listening to an old man's folk wisdom." Lars met his eyes without flinching. "Your son is dead because you built American when you should have built Swedish. Because you trusted pride over physics." "Yes, that's what I'm telling you." Harper looked like he might attack. His fists clenched. His face went red. But then something broke in him. He sat down hard and put his face in his hands. The room sat with that truth. Uncomfortable. Undeniable. 4 people dead. 61 people alive. The difference was knowledge. The difference was listening. The difference was humility. January 2nd through 10th, Edward compiled data. Temperature differentials, up to 87 degrees difference between inside and outside. Wood consumption rates, 6 to 8 pounds versus 35 to 50. Thermal mass calculations. Moisture levels dry and stable. Construction costs 197 versus 3 to 500. Labor hours, survival rate 100%. He wrote his article with the precision of a scientist and the passion of a man who'd seen people die unnecessarily. Earth-sheltered construction, a thermally superior alternative for prairie settlement. Data from the Dakota blizzard of 1876 to 77. He showed Jim the draft. "You made me sound like an engineer. You are an engineer. You just didn't study in a university. My grandfather's the engineer. I'm a Swedish farmer who remembered what his grandfather taught him," Lars said from his bed where he'd been spending more time. "That makes you an engineer. Accept it." Edwards submitted to the Dakota Free Press. Published January 18th, 1877. Spread through the territories within weeks. Late January. 3 families approached. John Peterson, 4 children, lost his house to fire the previous year, living in a claim shack. We barely survived the blizzard. Can you help us build something like yours? I can show you how. But I'll need to charge. This takes time. How much? $5. Consultation site, survey, custom plans. That's a week's wages. It's also your children's lives. Your choice. Peterson paid. Jim surveyed their land, found a south-facing slope, drew custom plans scaled for 6 people instead of 2. The Petersons built it in 6 weeks. It worked perfectly. Patrick Sullivan, Irish immigrant, no experience with extreme cold. We almost died. Magnus took us in, or we'd be like the Pierces. We need help. Jim adapted the design for flat land. Dig down more berm earth around, create artificial hillside. Use what's free. Earth is free. Earth doesn't burn. Earth doesn't rot. And most important, Earth doesn't forget warmth. Sullivan family built it. It worked. Heinrich Miller, Carl and Otto's father, finally swallowed his German pride. My sons say you know building. I say you're a boy. But my sons are right more than I am. I need help. What kind of help? My house is cold. Stone like Barrett's, my youngest daughter. She coughs all winter. The cold is killing her slowly. I can't rebuild your house, but I can modify it. How interior sod wall, 2 feet from stone wall. Air gap between, cuts heat, lost by half. That will work. Thomas Barrett did it. His house is 40 degrees warmer now. Barrett listened to a boy. Barrett listened to physics. Age doesn't matter to physics. Heinrich thought about this, about his daughter coughing, about his pride versus her life. Show me. They modified the Miller house. Temperature rose from 45 degrees to 62. Wood consumption dropped by half. The daughter's cough disappeared within a week. Carl approached Jim privately. You just saved my sister's life. My father won't say it, but I will. Thank you. Thank Otto. He's the one who convinced me to take you both on. Said you were good workers. We are. Because you taught us. I taught you to dig dirt. You taught us to think different. That's bigger than dirt. February. Magnus Thorson rode over with a request that must have cost him every ounce of pride. Jim, I need help. With what rebuilding? My house is killing my family slowly. I've been proud. I've been stupid. I'm done being both. What do you want? Teach me how you built. I'll pay a consultation fee. But I want to build it myself. With my sons. So we learn. Why yourself? I can draw plans. Because if I don't build it with my own hands, I won't understand it. And if I don't understand it, I can't teach my sons. And if I can't teach my sons, this knowledge dies with me. Lars, overhearing, spoke with approval. Smart man, no, slow learner. But I finally learned. Jim consulted. Magnus built, dug 2 feet into ground-burned earth against 3 walls, kept his timber frame, but added interior insulation with sod bricks and air gap. Wood consumption dropped from 40 pounds per day to 15. Temperature increased from 45 degrees to 62. After the first night in the modified house, Magnus returned. My wife cried this morning, not from cold, from warmth. First time in 3 years she's been warm. You built it, not me. You taught me. There's honor in teaching. My grandfather taught me that. Then honor him by teaching others. March. Lars weakened. The winter had taken its toll. Not from cold, the dugout had kept him comfortable, but from age. From 71 years of hard living, catching up to a body that had carried knowledge across an ocean, across a generation, across the gap between old world and new. He coughed more, moved slower, spent more time in bed. I'm old Jim. This body is wearing out. You're fine, just tired from winter. I'm dying, slowly but dying. We both know it. Don't talk like that. Listen, Lars's voice was firm despite his weakness. I need you to promise me something, anything. When I'm gone, don't stop. Keep teaching. Keep building. Keep remembering. Too many people forget. The Magnuses, the Thomases, they forgot. Their children will forget if no one teaches them. I'm 17. Who's going to listen to me, the people whose children are alive because of you? The Petersons, the Sullivans, the Millers. They'll listen, and they'll tell others. And the knowledge will spread. What if I forget? You won't, because it's written. Lars tapped the father's notebook with one shaking finger. Your father wrote it, Edward documented it, and you lived it. 3 generations of knowledge in one book. That doesn't forget. I don't want you to die. I don't want to either. But wanting doesn't change facts. I'm 71. I've lived longer than most. I built 3 hillside houses. I taught you to build yours. I've done my job. What's my job? Teach the next Magnus, the next Thomas, the next boy who doesn't have a smart father. That's your job, I promise. Good. Lars closed his eyes, exhausted from the short conversation. Your great-grandfather would be proud. I'm proud. Your father would be proud. 3 generations of knowledge living in you. The earth remembers Jim, and your helping men remember to listen. April. Spring arrived reluctant, suspicious, like it didn't quite trust that winter was done. Word spread. Jim consulted on 17 structures across Dakota Territory, 4 in Nebraska, 2 in Montana. Edward published a second article documenting the results. 0 deaths from exposure in families using earth-sheltered construction. Significant reduction in fuel costs. Improved health outcomes, particularly for children. Thomas Barrett spoke at a town meeting. I'm a master mason, 40 years experience. I built a $300 stone house that nearly killed my daughter. Jim Thornfield is 17. He built a $200 earth house that saved 3 lives during the worst blizzard in memory. Experience means nothing if you're learning the wrong things. Coming from a respected craftsman, the words carried weight. Reverend Ashford announced he was leaving for Massachusetts. Before departing, he visited the dugout one final time. I was wrong about you. I thought earth dwellings were unchristian primitive. But there's nothing primitive about keeping children alive. Nothing unchristian about using God's earth as God designed it. I was educated, but you were wise. I'm sorry, no need to apologize. You were protecting what you thought was right. I was protecting my pride disguised as morality. There's a difference. Learn it younger than I did. May. Carl and Otto Miller returned. We want to learn more, not just digging, the calculations, the physics, the why behind it. Well, because our father has 7 sons, land will be split 7 ways. We need skills that earn money beyond farming. Building earth houses, that's a skill people need. I'm not a teacher. You taught us last fall. We're still here. That's teaching. Jim looked at Lars, who was watching from his bed, thinner now, weaker, but still sharp-eyed. Teach them. They're good workers, smart, and they'll teach others. Knowledge multiplies. All right, but you work while you learn. I've got consultations coming. You help with building while I teach the principles. Deal. What do we learn first? Thermal mass. Why Earth at 6 feet depth stays 52 degrees year-round. Lars spoke from his bed, voice thin but clear. The Earth remembers warmth from summer, forgets it slowly through winter. By the time it forgets, summer comes again. Memory loop. Otto looked genuinely moved. That's beautiful, actually. Physics usually is, Lars said. Over the next months, Carl and Otto learned design principles, helped Jim build 8 structures, learned to calculate slopes, angles, load distribution. By fall of 1877, they were consulting independently. You don't need me anymore, Jim observed. We'll always need you, Carl said. You're the one who remembered when everyone else forgot. That matters. My grandfather remembered. I just listened. Then we'll listen too, and teach our sons to listen. And the knowledge keeps going. Lars, now barely able to leave bed, spoke weakly. That's legacy. Not money, not land. Knowledge passing through generations. That's what makes a man immortal. November 1877. Lars Thornfield died peacefully at 72. In the dugout. Warm. Comfortable. Surrounded by earth that had held him his whole life. His last words to Jim were quiet, almost inaudible. The earth held me my whole life. Now it'll hold me forever. Thank you for listening. Buried next to Samuel and Helen. 3 generations together in Dakota soil. The funeral was attended by Magnus Thorson and family, Thomas Barrett and family, the Petersons, the Sullivans, the entire Miller family, all 7 sons, Edward Winters. More than 30 homesteaders that Lars had helped indirectly. Magnus gave the eulogy. Lars Thornfield was the smartest man I knew. Not because he studied books, but because he remembered what books forget. He saved my family. He saved many families. The earth remembers him. We must too. Jim stood at the grave 18, now no longer a boy. He taught me that age doesn't make a man. Knowledge does. That strength isn't muscle, it's preparation. That legacy isn't land, it's teaching. He buried his grandfather with his father's notebook placed in the coffin. The knowledge was recorded elsewhere now. Edward had it, Jim had it, Carl and Otto had it. The notebook could rest with the men who'd created it. 5 years later, 1882, Jim Thornfield, 22 years old, proved up his homestead. 5 years completed, he'd consulted on 87 earth-sheltered structures, trained 12 apprentices, including Carl and Otto Miller, published 3 articles with Edward Winters, estimated 61 lives saved conservative count people who would have died from exposure in conventional houses. Uncle Jacob visited one final time. I was wrong about everything. The land, your ability, your father's plans. I'm sorry, apology accepted. I've been thinking. I have money saved. You have knowledge. Partnership, doing what teaching, building, spreading this knowledge across territories. I fund it, you lead it. We help families survive. Why now? Because I'm tired of being the man who values land over family. I want to be remembered for something good. You're giving me that chance. Jim thought about Lars's words, about legacy, about teaching, about knowledge multiplying. All right, partnership. But I lead. You fund, deal, deal. They built a training program, 3-month apprenticeships, hands-on building, physics principles taught alongside practical skills, graduates spread across territories. By 1885, over 200 structures built by Jim's trainees. 1890, Jim Thornfield, 35 years old, teaching a class of 15 young homesteaders ages 16 to 25, standing in front of the original dugout. Still standing, still warm, 14 years old. My grandfather taught me the earth remembers. What does that mean? A young man answered, Earth holds heat from summer, releases it slowly in winter. Correct. Why does that matter? Another voice, because if we build into Earth, we're surrounded by stable temperature. Yes. And what killed my father? Silence, Jim continued. Pride. He was a smart man, but he tried to build an American house because he wanted to fit in. Logging accident while cutting timber, he couldn't afford for a house that wouldn't work. What killed the Jensen brothers in 1876, cold someone offered? No, pride. They built tall timber houses to look prosperous, froze to death trying to heat them. What saved me, my grandfather and 61 other people? Humility, yes. Humility to listen, to remember, to use old knowledge instead of chasing new fashion. He pointed to the dugout. This house cost $197. 14 years old, never failed. Still 60 degrees inside when it's 20 below outside. My neighbor's timber house cost $400. Failed in 5 years. Which man was richer, you? No, my grandfather, because he taught me that wealth isn't money, it's knowledge. Money you can lose, knowledge you keep forever. And if you teach it, knowledge multiplies. Jim showed them his father's notebook, preserved now under glass sacred. 3 generations of knowledge in here. My great-grandfather built in Sweden. My grandfather remembered in America. My father calculated and documented. I built and survived. And now I teach you 5 generations of knowledge. That's legacy. One of the students, barely 16, raised his hand. Will you teach our children too, if they'll listen? If they're humble enough to learn from old men who remember? If they understand that the earth doesn't care about fashion or pride or what's modern, the earth just is. And if you listen to what it teaches, it'll hold you, warm you, keep you alive. The class nodded, understanding not just with their minds, but with something deeper. The knowledge settling into them like good soil. And in that moment, Jim understood what his grandfather had meant. This was immortality, not living forever, but teaching something that would live forever. Knowledge flowing through generations like water through stone, wearing away ignorance, carving channels of wisdom that would outlast any individual life. Flash forward, 2024, south of Yankton, South Dakota, a historical marker on a hillside overlooking the Missouri River bottomlands. The marker reads, Site of the Thornfield Dugout, 1876 to 1949. Here, James Thornfield, 1859 to 1931. With knowledge passed from his Swedish great-grandfather through his grandfather, Lars Thornfield. 1805 to 1877, pioneered thermal mass construction in North American prairie settlement. His design saved an estimated 61 lives during the harsh winters of 1876 to 1890 and influenced over 200 structures across Dakota Territory, Nebraska, and Montana. The original dugout maintained stable temperatures for 73 years without modern heating systems, a testament to intergenerational wisdom, humility, and understanding that the earth remembers what men forget. Below the marker, a brass plaque. In memory of Lars Thornfield, 1805 to 1877, who remembered. Samuel Thornfield, 1835 to 1875, who calculated. James Thornfield, 1859 to 1931, who built. Carl and Otto Miller, 1858 to 1935, 1860 to 1938, who taught. And 61 souls who lived because men chose wisdom over pride. A man stands at the marker. Michael Thornfield, 45, great-great-great-grandson of Jim, sustainable architect. He holds a soil thermometer, takes a reading at 6 feet depth, 52 degrees Fahrenheit. He speaks to his phone camera recording. I'm standing where my great-great-great-grandfather James Thornfield built his first earth-sheltered home in 1876. He was 17, orphaned. Everyone said he'd die. He didn't just survive, he revolutionized building. Holds up the thermometer. Temperature 6 feet underground. March 2024. 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Same as it was in 1876 when James measured it. Same as it'll be in 2124. The earth remembers. He shows the foundation outline barely visible in the hillside. This structure stood for 73 years. No heating system, no electricity, no modern insulation. Just earth physics and knowledge passed from a Swedish great-great-grandfather who nobody in America listened to until they started dying. Then they listened. Pauses. We're facing climate change, energy crisis, housing affordability crisis. And we're building the same way we did in 1950, fighting nature instead of working with it. My ancestor figured out in 1876 that Earth is a thermal battery, that passive systems outperform active ones, that old knowledge beats new fashion. We forgot, again, but the Earth still remembers. Question is, are we humble enough to listen? Camera pans across the prairie, hundreds of miles of modern homes, expensive energy-intensive fighting the land, then back to the barely visible foundation of a simple dugout that outlasted them all. Michael's voice continues. James Thornfield lost his father at 16, lost his mother at 17, got thrown into the worst blizzard in Dakota history with nothing but his grandfather's memory and his father's notebook. And he won. Not because he was strong, because he was humble enough to listen to old men who remembered. He touches the marker. 3 generations of knowledge in one winter. Great-grandfather builds in Sweden. Grandfather remembers in America. Father documents. Son proves. That's how wisdom survives, not through pride, through humility, through teaching, through remembering. Final shot. The thermometer reading, 52 degrees Fahrenheit, exactly as it's been for 148 years. Michael's voice quiet now, reverent. The earth holds sons just like it held my great-great-great-grandfather. If we're smart enough to let it, if we're humble enough to listen, if we're brave enough to remember what everyone else forgot, the earth remembers. Do we? This camera lingers on the marker, on the brass plaque with its list of names, on the hillside that still holds steady at 52 degrees, 6 feet down, but unchanging through century after century. Fade to black, final words appear on screen. James Thornfield, 1859 to 1931, consulted on 87 structures, trained 47 builders, and saved an estimated 61 lives during his lifetime. His apprentice Carl Miller went on to teach over 200 builders. The knowledge passed through 5 generations and is now taught in sustainable architecture programs worldwide. The earth remembers. We must remember to listen. End.